and the four Kumars. So earlier on, when Lord Vishnu had come personally to benedict Prithu Maharaj, he had given him this prediction/benediction that very soon Siddhas, eternally perfected souls, will come. And in accordance to that, the four Kumars, they personally come to give their audience to Maharaj Prithu. And when they come, the Maharaj Prithu very, very eagerly and happily, he greets them, he gives them an elevated position, glorifies them, and then inquires of them. So it's explained that when exalted personalities come, the best way to take advantage of their association is by placing relevant questions before them. So Prithu Maharaj, he in his welcome to the four Kumaras, he glorifies them, which is one of the angas of Atiti Satkar, that you give the person a place to sit, some water to drink, and some sweet words, which is words of glorifications. So Maitreya Rishi describes Prithu Maharaj's speech as sweet and concise, as meaningful and appropriate and beneficial. So the four Kumaras are very happy with the good quality, the humility, the compassion for Prithu Maharaj. And the question that Maharaj Prithu asks is that if they could explain to him what is the most potent benefit for those who are suffering. You can see it's a general question because it is asked for the welfare of the general people. As the Kumaras will say, note later on, that Maharaj Prithu is already liberated. But because he is who he is, compassionate towards everybody, he's not thinking about himself. He's thinking about his citizens and he's thinking about us. So he asks this question for the welfare of everyone, that what is the means of benefit for those who are suffering. And Sanat Kumar then begins to give an answer to the question. So he says that the only thing that can benefit is spiritual attachment and material detachment. Detachment from the bodily concept and attachment to the Lord. So he gives this conclusion upfront, and then he is developing on these two aspects. So he speaks about how one can develop spiritual attachment. And he talks about the various aspects of devotional service. He talks about most potent, obviously, being Shravana Kirtan, regular hearing and chanting, worshipping the Lord with faith, inquisitiveness. So the various angas by which one can develop spiritual attachment. And then he also begins to speak about material detachment, which, as we were reading, was reminding us a lot of the instructions by Rupa Goswami in Updeshamrita, where he talks about Atyahara, Prayascha, Spachalpa, Niyamagraha. And Sanat Kumar focuses a lot on association with materialists. So he says avoiding the association of those who are materially minded, or those who associate with those who are materially minded, or who think about material things. So it talks about the potency of association. And Rupa Goswami, Nectar of Instruction, the only anga that comes twice, right? He talks about both in things to do is to give up the association of materially minded people, and things not to do is to associate with materially minded people, right? Prabhupada says that this is so powerful that Rupa Goswami is not satisfied by just saying it once. He actually speaks about it twice. So Sanat Kumar here is kind of going back and forth between these two topics. He's presenting it as positive and negative. That what are the things that cause material attachment? What are the things that can be used to develop material detachment? And so he says things like following the acharyas, non-violence, simple living, tolerance. These are the things that can help develop material detachment. Just like associating with worldly minded people does the opposite. It results in creating material attachment. And then he also speaks about spiritual attachment. That from spiritual attachment comes Jnana and Vairagya, as the two byproducts of Bhakti are Jnana and Vairagya. And then he presents this bold statement that it results in the destruction of the subtle body, which is another way of saying that it results in liberation. And then he talks about what are the manifest symptoms of a destroyed subtle body. That one begins to see the Paramatma. So we had reached this point, and we will resume our discussion from verse 30. So 420 to 30. Indriyarveshyapraste akshiptam dhyayatam manaha chetanam harate buddhe stambhastoyam nivahrada. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost. Like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the brick grass straws on its bank. So as I mentioned, Sanat Kumar goes back and forth. He talks about material attachment, spiritual attachment, the dangers of material attachment, and how to avoid those obstacles. So in 4 verses, 30 to 33, Sanat Kumar again begins to speak about, so he has spoken about both these topics. Now he's again speaking in greater details about samsara, or the causes of material attachment. So Vishwanath Chakraborty, commenting on this verse, says that Sanat Kumar is explaining that attachment to things other than Atma is the cause of samsara. And then the sequence that is given is that the senses of a man who may be trying to give up sense objects can still be controlled by habit. And because of this habit, they can still become drawn to the sense objects. Vishnu Chakraborty says, even if he's standing in the forest, so even if he is away from the typical objects of sense attachment, but because of habit is conditioning, because of conditioning, the senses can still get attracted to the objects. And then the attachment grows. So he says that first the attachment comes in the form of sound and touch arising from memories. So one remembers the sound of one's family, or the taste of sumptuous food, or the sound of some pleasing music that they liked. Then it goes to the son and the wife and the friends. So in this way, it expands. And then when the senses are drawn, the mind is drawn after it. And when the mind is drawn after it, then it takes away the intelligence's ability to discriminate. So the analogy that is given over here is that a lake that is surrounded by big grass straws. So if one were to just look at the lake and the grass straws, one could never imagine that underneath the roots of these grass straws are drawing in the water from the lake. It happens so gradually that even the lake is not aware of it. But it happens. So if you look at this sequence of events, then you'll be reminded of Krishna's instruction, right? When Krishna speaks about it in the beginning of the 3rd chapter, Krishna says, Karmendrani samyamya yasati manasasparam indyarthan vimurdatma mithyachara suchyate. Right? He says that when somebody is restraining the senses of action, but the mind is dwelling, he's mithyachara suchyate. He's called a pretender. So this is a theme that Sanat Kumar is further going to develop. So Prabhupada says that therefore these columns of kusha grass should be cut or thrown away from the very beginning. Okay, next verse, 31. Harashyati anusmritischittam jnana brahmashra smriti kshaye tadrodam kavaya prahu atma panavam atmanaha. When one deviates from his original consciousness, he loses the capacity to remember his previous position or recognize his present one. When remembrance is gone, all knowledge acquired is based on false foundation. When it occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. So this is again similar to what we see in the later part of the 2nd chapter, the later part of the 3rd chapter, that when the ability to discriminate is gone, then remembrance is destroyed. Now, this is an important point because remembrance being destroyed does not mean that like one develops amnesia, that one just completely forgets what has happened, but one forgets the lessons that one has learned. So a person who is given to intoxication, he takes intoxication, and then after that, he suffers horribly because of the intoxication. And then next day, he does it again. Why? Because that memory of that suffering goes away. Only the selective memory of some kind of perverse enjoyment remains, but the suffering, the short and the long-term suffering, that has gone away. In this case, what Sanat Kumar is saying is that the memory of the sweetness of the eternal relationship with the Lord is lost. So in the second chapter, verse 62, 63, right? Krishna says, Dhyayate Vishayan Pumsan. So he gives this chain of fall down, that contemplating the object of the senses, then lust comes, attachment comes, from attachment lust comes, from lust anger comes, from anger delusion comes, from delusion bewilderment of memory, from bewilderment of memory intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls into the material pool. Now, once a disciple asked his guru that in this chain of cause and events, so Krishna gives this chain that begins with Dhyayate Vishayan Pumsan, that one contemplates the object of the senses and then this sequence happens. Which point can it be stopped? And the answer is, it can only be stopped at one stage, which is the Dhyato Vishayan Pumsan, which is at the stage of contemplation. After that, it's like a stone that's been rolled down the hill. After that, the fall of the stone is inevitable. Whether it's at the top of the hill or at the bottom of the hill, but it is inevitably going to fall down. The only way to stop it is by not pushing the stone down. Now, of course, this does not mean that there is no hope. The point that is made here is, in order to stop it at later stages, one needs to take help of somebody else. So if the stone is rolling down the hill, you need to take help of somebody who is also not rolling down the hill. Otherwise, it's going to accelerate the fall. So firstly, the stone that is rolling down the hill cannot stop itself. It can stop itself from rolling down. But once it is rolling down, it can't stop itself. Another stone rolling down cannot stop it. Only one that is not rolling. So, and that is why the position of the sadhu and the guru is glorified. That they are the only ones who can stop. Sometimes, and this is a mistake that the impersonalists do, that they think that they are so powerful that they can stop it. But because of how this whole cause and effect is orchestrated, and that is why Krishna is giving this, it is not possible. So the lesson for us is one, that we can stop it, but we can stop it at the contemplation stage. So last weekend we had this seminar on Manasha Shiksha, and one of the breakout sessions by Mahatma Prabhu was how to control the mind. And he was saying that devotees should take this phrase and make it kind of their slogan. What's the phrase? I choose not to. So when they see the mind going somewhere, then the devotee can say that I choose not to fill in the blanks after that. And whatever the sense object that the senses are hankering for. So this does two things. One, it gives the devotee the sense of empowerment. Because when you say, I choose not to, that means now you know that it was because of your choice that the opposite thing would have happened. It was your choice. So you choose not to means that by your own will, you have chosen the right path. And because of your own fall down, you would have chosen the wrong path. So it gives that sense of empowerment. And the second is that when you say that I choose not to, then you are essentially clipping it at the dhyato vishyan, that your mind is going somewhere and then you're saying, I choose not to. So you're using the mind to fight against the mind. In the end of the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says that that higher than the sense objects are the senses, higher than the senses is the mind, higher than the mind is intelligence, and higher than the intelligence is the Jiva. When how to fight against this eternal enemy in the form of lust, because of this reason, that the Jivas can say, I can choose not to. And that stops the boulder from rolling down. So Prabhupada writes in the purport that Mahaprabhu has instructed that if from the very beginning we do not take care of unwanted grass in the paddy field, the fertilizing agents of water will be used by them and the paddy plants will dry up. So this is Mahaprabhu explaining about anarthas. That if the anarthas are allowed to remain, then everything that we are using to cultivate our bhakti will actually be used by the anarthas. So in this verse, it is said that, or Sanat Kumar says that when this occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. Now, one may question that the soul is always pure and pristine. It's never contaminated. How can it be lost? So essentially what is being said contextually over here, that it is lost when it loses its understanding of his relationship with Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada makes the point that a human form without intelligence is like an animal. Now, one may debate this, that the human form also has a soul and the animal also has a soul. So how can you say that it is lost? It is lost in this way, that this knowledge is covered. So that's why it's sometimes posited that animals do not have a soul. Not because they don't have a soul, but the soul has lost its ability to discriminate, which is an essential nature of the soul. Similarly, a human being that is not exercising this intelligence for discrimination is considered to be like an animal or without a soul. Okay, verse 32. Nata prataro loke pumsah swartha vyatikramaha yad adhyayanayasya preyastvam atmana swavyatikrama. There is no stronger obstruction to one's self-interest than thinking other subject matters to be more pleasing than one's self-realization. So essentially, what is Sanat Kumar saying? That the destruction of the knowledge is the greatest harm to the jiva. So when he says other things, he's talking about sense gratification. So the point that he's making is, if somebody thinks that sense gratification is higher than self-realization, that is the greatest obstruction in one's advancement. Vishna Chakraborty makes this interesting point that he said that what Sanat Kumar is saying, that only the jiva is responsible for this. There is no external impetus. So only because of how the jiva exercises its free will does this fall from the spiritual position happens, this staying in the material position happens, and this return to the spiritual position happens. He's putting it all completely under the responsibility of only the jiva. So there is nothing that is dearer to the soul than the Atma, yatadhi Atma. So conversely, there is no greater harm to the soul than the destruction of the Atma. Or he says, where there is no power of reflection and other things become dear, other material things, that is the greatest harm to oneself. And he says that is the spontaneous destruction of the Atma. There is no other cause for this destruction because swa-artha, because it comes on its own. This means that the jiva's association with ignorance is without beginning. It has been accomplished in the past spontaneously. Therefore, devotion to the Paramatma, the shelter of the jiva, is suitable. For that purpose, it is recommended to perform bhakti. Now, again, when Vishna Chakraborty says there is a spontaneous destruction of the Atma, he is essentially using Atma as a stand-in for Atma Gyan. Atma as the soul cannot be destroyed, but Atma Gyan, which is essentially knowledge of oneself and the other Atma, which is the Paramatma, that is destroyed. Now, spontaneously destroyed means that as soon as one's self-awareness changes, the jiva immediately falls. So there is no drawn out phase. Now, this is again something that it goes to the fall of the jiva discussion, which amongst the acharyas there are different views. I'm sharing this because this is the commentary by Vishna Chakraborty, not something that I feel I was qualified to comment on one way or the other. But he does say, he makes this point that the process is spontaneous, and once it happens, it is very difficult to reverse. So he makes 2 or 3 points that this destruction has happened since eternity. Only the jiva is responsible for it. It happens out of his free will. And as soon as it happens, the jiva falls. The reversal of this is very, very difficult. So he's making all these points to warn the conditioned soul about continuing to make the same mistake and be extra vigilant about it. Okay, next verse 23. Arthendriya bhidyana swartha pahanavo nrana brahmashito jnana vigyada yena veshati mukhyata. For human society, constantly thinking of how to earn money and apply it for sense gratification brings about the destruction of everyone's interests. When one becomes devoid of knowledge and devotional service, he enters into species of life like those of trees and stones. So you see what Sanat Kumar is doing over here. Initially, he was talking about the glories of material detachment. Now he's talking about the dangers of material attachment. So the first thing was that it caused the fall of the Jiva. Now he says is that it's not just it just stops at the human form of life. The fall continues and it goes to, he says, trees and stones, mukhyata. So Prabhupada in the purport, he interestingly presents this understanding that this is the destination of the Shunyavadis. That because they try to stop all activities, they try to become without activity, Shunya, they get the form of hills and stones, which essentially are just not doing anything. So Prabhupada writes that Jnana means to understand one's constitutional position. Vigyan refers to practical application of that, which means to understand one's constitutional, refers to practical application of that knowledge in life. In the human form of life, one should come to the position of Jnana and Vigyan, right, which is knowledge and wisdom, intellectual understanding and practical application. But then he says if one does not do this under the guidance of the scriptures and the Guru, then one falls down and would ultimately end into a non-moving species like hills and mountains, trees and plants. The stage of life is known as punyatam or mukhyatam. Namely, all activities are now zero. Philosophers who support stopping all activities are called Shunyavadi. By nature's own way, our activities are to be gradually diverted to devotional service. But there are philosophers who, instead of purifying their activities, try to make everything zero or void. So Prabhupada doesn't call them out, but essentially this is the Buddhist philosophy, where they basically give up everything with the idea of merging into nothingness, known as Shunyavadis. The soul can obviously never become nothing, but it gets a form that is devoid of practically all sensience. Okay, moving on to the next verse, 34. Na kuryat karichit sangam tamastivram titirishuhu dharmartakama mokshana yad atyan vigatakam. Those who strongly desire to cross the ocean of nations must not associate with the modes of ignorance. For hedonistic activities are the greatest obstruction to realization of religious principles, economic development, regulated sense gratification, and at last, liberation. So Vishna Chakraborty says that this verse is not condemning karma. It is condemning vikarma, because speaks about dharma, arth, kam, and moksha. So obviously, arth and kam, they are centered around karma. So, Sanat Kumar is saying that it's not that all attachment to material objects is forbidden. Since according to the scriptures, dharma, arth, and karma is allowed. So Vishwanath Chakraborty Path says that this is the opinion of some. Others say that all association is forbidden, which is including dharma, arth, and kam. Only thing that is not forbidden is moksha. And then he gives a reference from 1 to 9 that all occupational duties are only meant for liberation. Right? So they should not be performed for material gains, but only for liberation, which means moksha is fine. So he's presenting both different acharyas say different things. Some acharyas say that okay to do prescribed duties, and others say that only focus on liberation. So one is to avoid the association of sense objects that are contrary to Dharma Shastra, right? That is vikarma. And the other opinion is to reject everything. Srila Prabhupada, he covers both the points. He says that as long as there is body, it's not possible to give up the engagement of the senses with the object. However, one should take the bare minimum, that is also as per the recommendation of the scriptures. Like salt, that one takes only a pinch of salt. That is enough to make the food tasty. One should not take palmful of salt, because that will destroy the health of the person. Similarly, one should engage in karma only till the level that it is needed for sustenance. After that, it becomes harmful. And even one should engage in that karma that is given in the scriptures. So Prabhupada expands on this with analogies. So he gives the difference between prostitution and marriage. That in both there is sex enjoyment. In the former, it is irreligious and unrestricted. So therefore it is forbidden. In the later, it is regulated. And as per the scriptures, so it is recommended. So the purpose of the regulation is to allow for some amount of engagement of the senses with the objects while practicing sense control. So this is the whole science of karma kand. People say, why Krishna is condemning over and over, yam imam pushpitam vacham, why he's saying that these Vedas are all flowery words, they're talking about sense enjoyment. And the Vedas are coming from Krishna. Why is he condemning it? Because of this reason, that the Vedas allow for regulated sense engagement while practicing self-control. So Prabhupada says that Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras, and if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastra and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled, and at the same time, we will be able to go forward to liberation. Okay, I'll do, okay, so this is a logical break. I'll pause after this, and I'll quickly go through the sequence of instruction given by Sanat Kumar. So in verse 30, he talks about Indriya Vishayakshata Dhyayatam, the thinking of the object of the senses. What happens? Akshiptam Manah. The mind becomes agitated. Then what happens? Chetanam Harate Buddha. That the discriminating power of the intelligence is lost. Then what happens? Verse 31, that Bhrashyatya Anusmriti Chitta. Memory is lost. Then Jnana Brahmasha. That knowledge is lost, which is the greatest harm to the soul. Then, devoid of this knowledge and realizations, Brahmashita Jnana Vigyata. This is verse 33. All the desirable goals are destroyed. Sarva Artha Apahanana. So all the desirable goals are destroyed. And then what happens after that? Yena Avishati Mukhyatam. One falls into the lower immovable forms. So I'll send this table over also later on. Interesting to see the parallel with second chapter, and how Sanat Kumar also emphasizes on, because Sanat Kumar at the end of the day, they're worshipping Krishna through intelligence. So this is the primary meditation, that intelligence is the cause and of one's fall down can be used to reconnect with Krishna. But because they are devotees also, we'll see how they connect this to Bhakti. Okay, so let me pause here and see if we have a discussion.
Hi, Krishna. You were explaining about this Sunyavadi, which is described in the purport of text number 33. And you said it's an aspect of the philosophy of the Buddhist, if I get it correct. Can you explain a little more about this Sunyavadi as opposed to just like in the Prabhupada Pranamanja to describe Nirvisesa Sunyavadi? Can you explain that a little more?
So Prabhupada talks about these two kinds of philosophical deviation. The Nirvisheshas are the Mayavadis, and they are the followers of Sripad Shankaracharya who want to become God. So their goal is becoming one with God and thereby becoming God. And then there's the philosophical followers of Lord Brahma who follow the neti, 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 that I'm not the body, I'm not the senses, I'm not this, I'm not this. So their philosophy is that once you negate everything, then you're left with nothing. And that's essentially your perfection. Shunya means zero. That's essentially is your perfection. So the philosophy is based on the fact that the cause of all these troubles and suffering is existence. The fact that you're existing is causing all this suffering. When you cease to exist, then all this thing goes away. So they do subscribe to it's a little bit of a hybrid. They do subscribe to the notion of reincarnation. They subscribe to the notion of Atma and taking on a body, very similar to what is explained in the Gita. But essentially that they say is that as long as the soul is conditioned, it tries to establish an individual identity. And then that's why it takes on different bodies. When it is perfect, then at that stage, it ceases to exist. It knows that its own existence is an illusion. It ceases to exist and becomes like shunya. So that is also it was popularized by Lord Buddha, but it's a philosophy that's been there around. I don't know much details about who were the acharyas earlier on. Buddha didn't like completely invent it out by himself. He kind of took something and made it, but it's been around since ancient times.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prabhu. Okay. If there's no other comments, we can move on to the next verse. Verse 35. Tatrapi moksha evartha atyantika tasayeshyate traivargyor thoyato nityam kritan bhaya samyutaha. Out of the four principles, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation has to be taken very seriously. The other three are subject to destruction by the stringent laws of nature, death. In the previous verse, Sant Kumar has said that anything contrary to the Chatur Purusharthas should be rejected. Or at least that was, Vishna Chakraborty said it could be understood in two ways. But one of the way was that Sant Kumar was saying that follow the Chatur Purusharthas and reject anything that is contrary to them. Here is expanding that out of this Chatur Purusharthas, moksha is the most important and has to be taken seriously. Now, how seriously? Even if the other three have to be sacrificed. So it is that much more important. So as advised by Sutta Goswami, that this is right at the beginning of Bhagavatam, where it says all occupational engagements, same verse that was quoted earlier on, should only be done for the purpose of moksha. So they should only be done if they're supporting moksha. If they're not being done in that way, then they should be rejected. So one may question that why should moksha be prioritized? And Sanat Kumar explains that because the other three items are material. And when you say that something is material, you're also saying that it is temporary. It is subject to destruction. Now in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that death I am, that I ultimately take everything, right? He says, Mrityu sarva harsi chaham. 10th chapter he says, right, that death at the end of the day takes away everything. And then in the 11th chapter he says, Kalu asmi lokaksha krata pravadu, that time I am, destroyer of the world. And in the 9th chapter he says, Amritam chair mrityascha, that I am death and I am immortality. So Krishna, in his form of time, Kalu asmi, or mrityu, right, in the form of death, he is taking away everything that is material, which are these three purushas. The solution to this problem is to So the problem is that death is taking away everything. The solution to the problem is take away death, which is to aspire for being deathless. And that's the solution that Krishna gives. So in the 7th chapter, he says, right, Jara Marna Mokshaya Mam Ashrita Yatanti che. That intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death, they take refuge in me and devotional service. And similar point in 4.9, he says, Jamakaram Chame Divyam, Yome Veti Takpata, Tikta Deham Punarjanam, Neti Ma Meti Arjuna. They give up this body and do not accept another body. So he is guiding, the four Kumaras are now guiding the audience towards Bhakti. That death takes away everything that is material. So best is to take away death. And the way to, and death is Krishna, or it's a form of Krishna. So best way to take away death is to take shelter of Krishna. Prabhupada says the conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Golok Vrindavan, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. So here Prabhupada is putting in a plug for real moksha, not the impersonal liberation, not the liberation into the heavenly planets, but real moksha, which is aspiring to live in the spiritual world with Krishna. Okay, verse 36. Pare vare chaye bhava gunavyati karadanu na tesham vidyate kshemam isha vidvam shita shisham. We accept as blessings different states of higher life, distinguishing them from lower states of life. But we should know that such distinction exists only in relation to the interchange of the modes of material nature. Actually, these states of life have no permanent existence, for all of them will be destroyed by the Supreme Controller. So why should you reject dharma, artha and kama? Because essentially dharma, artha and kama is giving this. It is giving different states of higher life, or in absence giving lower states of life. But this is eventually going to be taken away. So essentially this verse is an expansion on why dharma, artha and kama should be given up. So Vishwanath Chakraborty says that this verse explains about being linked to fear of destruction. There is no auspiciousness for those existence such as Brahma. So he's translated Pare as Brahma and Avare, which is lower than Brahma, such as Indra, because they are all the result of the agitation of the various gurus, or various gunas, sorry. So two reasons are given to reject dharma, artha and kama. One is that they are temporary, and the second is that they are material. And in a way, they are the same, because anything that is material is temporary. So Srila Prabhupada expands on the phrase Isha Vidvam Shita Ashisham, that which means destroyed by the Lord. So how does the Lord destroy dharma, artha, kama? So he destroys it either in his form as time or in his form as the law of karma. Right? How does he destroy it in the form of law of karma? That when the pious benefits of the activities are exhausted by the force of the law of karma, punyashinam, they fall down. Right? So, in that form, or the person is enjoying the body, living a long life, but then eventually the time comes for the person to die, all the way from Brahma Bhuvanal Lok, everybody from Brahma down to the lowest planet. So there are 6 distractions that happen. There's a distraction that happens at the end of the life of Brahma. There's one that happens at the end of the day of Brahma. There is one that happens at the end of the Chatur Yuga. There is one that is the destruction of the material opulences for the sadhaka. The 5th is the destruction of demons like Ravan. And the 6th is the, not explicitly given, but in his purport, Srila Prabhupada points this to the destruction of the samsara for the devotee. So Prabhupada gives these 6 kinds of destructions that are happening. And Prabhupada expands on each one of them. So for the first form of the destruction, he quotes 8:16, from the highest planet to the lowest, the plate of miseries. And the second form of destruction is only when earth. So first is when dharma, artha, and kam, all 3 are followed. And one is living piously. But even that is destroyed at the end of the end of the day of Brahma, or the life of Brahma. Then for those who are following only Arth and Kam, then the Lord comes in form of the law of karma, or he might come as personally, in terms of paritranaya sadhuna vinashaya cha dushkritam, like he comes in form of Krishna or Kalki later on. So that's the second form of the destruction. Then there is another destruction that is sanctioned by the Lord to facilitate the journey of the devotee towards him. The Prabhupada says, it is said by the Lord, Yasyaham anugranami harishyatad dhanam shanay. The Lord told Yudhishthira Maharaj that his special favor is to show to his devotees when he takes away all the devotees' material opulences. This is chapter 10, verse 88. And then finally, there is the destruction of the samsara for his devotees so that they can return back to Godhead. Srila Prabhupada also gives the example of Ravan and how his kingdom was extending to Brazil. Then to illustrate that one may surrender to the Lord or his devotees to get material opulences. Like, Ravan was worshipping Brahma and Lord Shiva, but ultimately they are destroyed. And he makes a reference to Brazil. It doesn't say over there, but I remember hearing somewhere else where, and I will not be able to quote the source, but what I heard was that there is some pastime of Ravan trying to build golden stairs to Swargalok so that people did not have to perform pious activities. They can simply ascend by that stairs. So I'm not sure how does that work, but essentially he needed a lot of gold. So he essentially dug a gold mine right through the earth all the way to Brazil to extract gold and build the gold stairs. Okay. So on to verse 37. Tatvam narendra jagatam matha tastusham cha dendriya shudishanatma bhira vratana yaha kshetravit tapataya hiddi vishwagavihi pratyakshakashti bhagavan stamave swasmi. Sanat Kumar advised the king, therefore, my dear King Prithu, try to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is living within everyone's heart, along with the individual soul. In each and every body, either moving or not moving, the individual soul are fully covered by the gross material body and the subtle body made of the life, air, and intelligence. Now, in the previous set of verses, Sanat Kumar has glorified moksha. Now he is going to be speaking about how to attain moksha. So in two verses, 37, 38, he talks about impersonal liberation, Brahmajyoti. And then in the two verses after that, he speaks about personal liberation attained through Gyan. So this verse, these two verses, 37, 38 are essentially talking about Bhakti Mishra Gyan. And essentially talking about Sage Mukti. So Bhakti needs to be there. Anytime you have a goal that is beyond material, even material, but beyond material, Bhakti needs to be there, but it is in small quantities. Right? So when we say Bhakti Mishra Gyan, the way it works is that so it's like you say that salt mixed in water. So when you say salt mixed in water, what you're saying is that there's a glass of water and there's a pinch of salt. So there's a prominence of water and there is a trace of salt. So when you say Bhakti Mishra Gyan, then what you're saying is that predominantly Gyan, but with a pinch of Bhakti. Yeah. So Vishna Chakraborty says that that this kind of liberation without Bhakti is achieved by performing impersonal Brahma Gyan. Therefore, know the Paramatma who is revealed or who reveals Chakshati in the hearts of the moving and the non-moving beings covered by bodies, senses, live airs, etc. The method of knowledge is explained. So what is the method of knowledge? It is I am he, so asmi. Just as the rays of the sun is also the is also the sun, in one sense, I am a. So here Vishnu Chakraborty is talking about the philosophy of Sayujya Bhakti. What goes on behind the so asmi. That what they say is that just like the ray of the sun is the sun, I am a pure ray of Paramatma, so I am Paramatma. The Paramatma is not material, I am not material. So the essential message is that for this kind of liberation, one should know the Paramatma who is in all the moving and non-living, non-moving bodies. Chakshati Jagatam Tastusha. How to know the difference between the Jiva and the Paramatma? Sanat Kumar says that the Jiva is Avaratranam. The Jiva is covered with Deha Indriya Su, that the Jiva is covered with the gross and the subtle body, the Paramatma is not. The Paramatma is Kshetravit, the knower of Kshetra, and the Jiva is not. Jiva is the knower of the Kshetra, but only his own Kshetra. Same point made in 13th chapter. So thinking in this way, the impersonalists meditate on the Paramatma. So asmi, I am that. That I am that Paramatma. Srila Prabhupada, he translates the verse. So he says that try to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Srila Prabhupada gives us the glimpse of Bhakti there. But in the purport, he talks about both the personal and the impersonal. So the purport actually is giving more of a literal translation of the verse. Prabhupada says that the Vedic injunction says Tattvamasi, that you are the same, and so aham, I am the same. The impersonalist conception of these mantras is that the Supreme Lord of the Absolute Truth and the living entity are one. Right? So this is what this verse is saying. Then Prabhupada says, but from the devotee's point of view, these mantras assert that the Supreme Lord and ourselves are of the same quality. So that's how Prabhupada's translation is also correct. That qualitatively they are the same, but not in any other way. Okay, let's go on to verse 38. Yasmin nidam sad asarnatmataya vibhati maya vivek viduti srajiva hi buddhi tam nitya mukta parishuddha vishuddha tattvam pratiyudha karma kalila prakritim prapatye. The Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests himself as one with the cause and effect within this body. But one who has transcended the illusory energy by deliberate consideration, which clears the misconception of a snake for a rope, can understand that the Paramatma is eternally transcendental to the material creation and situated in pure internal energy. Thus, the Lord is transcendental to all material contamination. Unto him only one must surrender. So, previous verse, Sanat Kumar spoke about attaining impersonal liberation through Gyan. This verse clarifies the possible misconceptions that those who are on the path of Gyan may have. Prabhupada clarifies for us in the previous verse. Sanat Kumar is clarifying in this verse. So one can understand that the cause of the universe is Maya. And Maya is the Bahirangi Shakti of the Paramatma. The Jiva is the Tathaksh Shakti of the Paramatma. Now, in the previous verse, the Paramatma was described as Kshetravit. Kshetravit means that knower also and living in all living entities. So, understanding the non-difference between the possessor of the energy, which is the Paramatma, and the energies, which is the external energy and the marginal energy, is defeating illusion. So this is the clarification that Sanat Kumar is is giving. So we'll go over it once more. The point that he's making is that the material world is an energy of the Paramatma. The Jiva is an energy of the Paramatma. There is no difference between the Shakti and the Shaktiman. Therefore, one can say that there is no difference between the Paramatma and the Jiva. Now, based on this, the Mayavadi conclusion is that the living entity and the super soul is completely identical. There is no difference. So what do they say? That there is no separate existence outside the impersonal Brahman. And this whole sense of separation is Maya or illusion. And the Maya is one by which one considers a rope to be a snake. So actually this rope and the snake argument is generally offered by Mayavadi philosophers. So what they say is that all the differences are illusory, and enlightenment is seeing that everyone is the same. So this is Vivartavad, that including the Lord, everyone is the same. Now, this is partial, incomplete, and incorrect understanding. And Sanat Kumar speaks this verse to clarify that misunderstanding, that even though there is oneness, so agreeing to all the points that are made, that the Jiva is the energy of the Paramatma, Shakti, Shaktiman, non-difference between Shakti and Shaktiman. He says, agreeing to all this, there is still a difference between the Paramatma and the Jiva. The Paramatma is Nitya Mukta, eternally liberated, Parishuddha, always pure, Vishuddha Tattva, beyond the modes, and Pratyuta Karma Kalil Prakritim Prapadya, that he's always defeating the material energy contaminated by karma. So when Sanat Kumar is attributing these qualities to the Paramatma, what he means is that these qualities are not there in the Jiva. The Paramatma is Nitya Mukta. The Jiva is Nitya Baddha. The Paramatma is Vishuddha Tattva. The Jiva is under the controls of the modes. The Paramatma is Parishuddha. The Jiva is contaminated by the modes. The Paramatma is constantly defeating material energy. The Jiva is constantly being defeated by the material energy. The Paramatma is the cause of this Maya, which is causing the Sad Asad Atmaya Vibhati, which is this manifestation of the universe. So therefore, the Paramatma although situated within the heart, along with the Jiva, is superior to the Jiva. So when there is this superiority that comes in, the distinction automatically comes in. Right? So he said, I don't have to prove distinction separately. All I have to prove is, so he meaning Sanat Kumar, so all I have to prove is that the Supreme Lord is superior to the Jiva. So when one thing is superior to the other, it can't be the same. So the Lord is always transcendent, always beyond matter. And one who understands this, Sanat Kumar says, is Vivek Vidhuti. So his intelligence has now been restored. Now, this same philosophy is also presented very succinctly by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Achintya Bheda Bhed, right? The material energy is the external potency, and therefore the jivas being the marginal potency are one with the Lord, qualitative oneness and quantitative distinction. However, intelligence in self is not sufficient. So this simultaneous oneness and difference, Mahaprabhu says, is achintya, which means that it is inconceivable. So if it is inconceivable, then one might say, why are you speaking about it? Now, this term achintya bheda bhed tattva was not really coined by Mahaprabhu. He explained the tattva, but Jiva Goswami was the one who coined it and made it popular later on. The reason that it is said that it is achintya means that it cannot be conceived by knowledge, cannot be conceived by gyan. One has to surrender, which is bhakti. It can only be conceived by bhakti. Then it becomes chintya. Right? When Krishna says that I give them the knowledge to understand. Understand what? Understand this that is otherwise inconceivable. So Sanat Kumar is now introducing the notion of bhakti, because he's establishing distinction between the jiva and the Paramatma. He's establishing the superiority of the Paramatma over the jiva, and he is establishing prapadyaya, the need for the jiva to surrender to the Paramatma. So he's still talking about gyan. You see the transition now, right? Still talking about gyan. But he's saying in order to get that knowledge, you have to surrender to the Lord. So this is the component of bhakti that is needed. Right? So we are still talking about impersonal liberation. But even in that impersonal liberation, one needs to have this surrender to the Lord. So Prabhupada says that unless the Lord is superior to the individual soul, there is no question of prapadya. There is no question of surrender. The word prapadya refers to the process of devotional service. Simply by non-devotional speculation on the rope and the snake, one cannot approach the absolute truth. Okay. Let's see. So I'll stop after this verse because the next verse is also has a very long explanation to it. And I'll stop by reading out Vishna Chakraborty's commentary on this verse, and then we can have a discussion if it is or any other questions. So Vishna Chakraborty on this verse says that this verse rejects the idea that the Lord becomes contaminated by being present in the hearts of all living beings. In him, Mayim lights up this universe situated with high and low forms, cause and effect, sadasat, actually effect and cause. The cause of the universe is Maya. The universe is destroyed by the discernment, viveka, vidhuti. This discernment gives realization of non-difference. The universe arises from Maya, and being Maya, it is the external energy of the Paramatma. The Jiva is the Tathastha energy of the Paramatma. The energies and the possessor of the energies are non-different. Thus, the universe, the Jiva and the Paramatma are non-different, but not illusory. Difference is compared to thinking that a garland is a snake. The word va indicates that undifferentiated realization which claims that all difference is an illusion is the opponent's view, that of Vivritavadis. The Lord is ever liberated because he is completely pure, because he is Vishuddha Tattva. He defeats Prakriti contaminated by karma. I surrender to him. Without bhakti to Paramatma in the form of surrender, liberation is not possible. Thus, the secondary role of bhakti as an anga of Gyan has been shown. Okay, so I'll pause over here and see if there is discussion.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Again, another complex class. Thank you very much for teasing it out. Some of the things that I was thinking, like on the one hand, how fall down of a soul is so spontaneous. We were talking about how spontaneous it is falling down. And going back to self-realization is a very hard process. On the other hand, soul is naturally related to the Supreme Lord, and its natural position is to be related to Supreme Lord. So to be in the natural position is so difficult. It's kind of counterintuitive to see. But at the same time, I was thinking the analogy of my own observation of that is, just in modern times, we have come far away from the natural living conditions, and going back to the natural living conditions is very, very hard. So we cannot without a washing machine or so many different gadgets that we have. Going back to the grounds is so difficult. So similarly, that's what I was thinking. Although our natural position is to be with the Supreme Lord, we have come away from that. So going back to that is so difficult. So we can see that in a practical life also how. So that was one thing that I was observation. And second thing is about interesting. This is a question about in this set of verses we are talking about surrendering to Paramatma rather than to Bhagavan. And why is that? It's like we understand the devotional service is mainly focused to the Bhagavan, teacher of the Supreme Absolute Truth. But here it's mostly focused on Paramatma. Could you please elaborate why is that? And
it's a good question. I don't have the answer for that. I can share some observations, not sure if it's the answer. These verses are, as you know, they are talking more about impersonal liberation. So impersonal liberation actually focus more towards the Brahman, but here it is spoken of in relationship to Paramatma. Later verses, when Sanat Kumar starts talking about bhakti, he talks more. There also he talks about Paramatma mostly. The only other thing I can think of is that there's really no difference between the Lord in the heart and the Lord in Vaikuntha. But I don't have a definitive answer to your question, Prabhu.
Just one other thing, Prabhu. Why only Sanat Kumar speaking? Other Kumars not speaking in this conversation? Is there a reason?
Well, it'd be difficult, right, if all four of them started speaking at the same time. And Sanat Kumar is considered to be the leader of the four Kumars. So when the four Kumars are referred to, they're also often referred to as Sanatadi. So he's the first amongst the four.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Prabhuji, I was thinking about this example about the ball gliding down the hill and how Dhyato is basically the but sometimes I feel like that, is that like the only cause, or do you think there could be like other reasons that a soul, like, the fall down happens?
That analogy is not really for the fall down of the soul, but it's for the engagement. It's for the engagement of the senses with the objects, right? We say that it starts from the contemplation of the sense objects, and then from that contemplation, then one begins to engage with it, and then lust and anger and all that comes in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking like, like sometimes it just happens instantaneously also. Like for me, for example, like, if I go to the kitchen and open the fridge, like, I just see some sweets and I just want to eat it. I mean, even though I haven't been thinking about them, but the moment I see something, like, I instantly want to, enjoy it. So although I didn't plan it, I was thinking of like refraining from it. So it just happens instantaneously. So I was thinking, I don't know, like, is that something? Because
you're right that it's safe to keep the senses away from the objects, and that's why there is all this focus on good association and following the prescriptive recommendations of the scriptures. My understanding of how this works out is that if the senses have not begun to contemplate about the object of the senses, then the presence of the objects will not disturb the senses. So in this whole cause and effect chain that Krishna establishes, he establishes the root as the fact that there is the contemplation that is going on. So let's assume I have attraction to sweets, or I'll give you a real example. Like I have no attraction to sweets, but my wife is very attracted to sweets, and she has the same challenges, right? She tries to eat as little of it as possible. But the difference is that if I open the fridge and there is sweet there, it doesn't do anything for me, because I've never contemplated that how I would enjoy the sweets. Now there are other things that I contemplate, which have different effects, but at least not that. And so the root of it is maybe a subtle form of contemplation, and then there could be different triggers. But it could be because of the actual engagement of, I might contemplate sitting all day that I'm driving a Ferrari, but I'm not going to get a Ferrari. So what's the point in contemplating that, right? So it's not going to, at least that's not going to take me down the hill. But then, when that necessary condition is met, then other conditions might come and make it sufficient for the senses to engage, right? I'm contemplating about eating a sweet. I open the fridge. There is actually a sweet. The sweet happens to be the kind that I like. I happen to be hungry, and then I go ahead and eat the sweet. So the other conditions make it sufficient, but the necessary condition is that there should be that contemplation. There should be some attachment, because if you're not even contemplating, then the rasgullas might be there. It doesn't do anything. That makes sense?
Yes, true, absolutely. And this was something that I've been thinking about since the past few days, actually. And I mean, good. I mean, it's good that this came up in this class, because I think it's the right forum to ask in this context also, because so I was thinking, like, why should we stay away from objects? It feels like, we're from sense objects, right? I mean, it feels like it's this very childish way of like detaching oneself, or like keeping oneself away, like, keep child away from the toys, and they will not engage in them, just out of sight, out of mind situation. And we kind of try to be try to do the same thing basically to practice or as practicing devotees. But I mean, I don't know when will we come to that point where the object is there and we don't want to enjoy it. Like and when can we advance to that level? When can we not take that extra morsel of food, and basically just live for to keep the body and soul. So it's I mean, I understand that Maya is strong, and we hear a lot of examples about like different demigods and exalted demigods falling to Maya. I mean, she's definitely one of the strongest devotees, but yeah, I was just thinking, like, it's just it seems very, very preliminary at best. If I'm thinking,
You're right. It's preliminary. It's preliminary because we kind of had the preliminary stage itself, right? We're. I mean, the analogy used was good. Children, there are some things that they might overindulge in. Now I see children, they're getting addicted to like iPads, and it's kind of interesting. My wife and I were having this discussion. My wife used to teach children. We were having this discussion that this addiction of children to these electronic devices. The highest watched video on YouTube is like it's like got like 10 billion hits on it, not million, billion hits. It's some like nursery rhyme for children. So obviously there are parents who are giving the children the iPads and they keep like listening to it over and over again. The easiest way to curtail is take away the iPad from them. Right. So preliminary stage, or maybe when they grow up, they can buy iPad and nothing much you can do about it. But in that stage, that's what helps. Not the solution, but is definitely not aggravating the problem. So that's how it is presented at that time. So if I know that rasgullas are my weakness, I should probably not keep them in my refrigerator. Or maybe I'll still go out and buy them, but there's more effort to buy them and there. So there's some amount of curtailment that is there. So it's all external. Ideally speaking, it should be that I shouldn't eat. And they're in a plate in front of me and I still have no attraction to them. So one is not a substitute for other, but it's presented more in a way that while I'm trying to reach that stage, then I practice the others. One is internal, one is external. While I'm trying to reach that stage of internal detachment, I'm protecting and practicing myself through external detachment. But it's not a replacement for the one is not a replacement for the other.
Okay. Thank you, bro.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we'll stop here. Thank you so much for your attention and wonderful questions and discussions. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yethai Gaur Premanandi. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.